The cold was a living thing in this town. It seeped into your bones and settled in your marrow, a constant, bitter companion that clung to the windows and frosted the breath of anyone foolish enough to linger outside for too long, and Clara had made her peace with it a long time ago, her little diner, a bastion of warmth and light against the relentless northern chill, a sanctuary of hot coffee and fresh-baked bread, a haven for the weary souls who passed through, and she knew every single one of them by name, by their order, by the stories they carried, a tapestry of lives woven together by the simple, comforting thread of her cooking, a thread that was about to be tested in a way she could not have possibly foreseen, a test that would come in the form of a sudden and unexpected influx of men in uniform, and it was the kind of cold that the local weather report had been warning about for days, a Siberian front that was supposed to hit with a vengeance, a cold so brutal it could snap the limbs off trees and turn the very air into a weapon, and it was even worse than they had predicted, a low, howling wind that whipped through the town, a wind that carried the fine, stinging grains of ice, a wind that made the teeth ache and the eyes water, and she had planned to close early, a rare treat for herself, a simple, quiet evening with a hot bowl of soup, a night of rest for her aching feet. But then the first knock came, a timid, hesitant tap on the glass of her door, and she looked up from her polishing rag, a look of surprise on her face, to see a young man huddled outside, his shoulders hunched against the biting wind, his face a mottled mix of red and purple, his breath a ragged cloud of steam in the bitter air. He was a soldier. She saw his uniform beneath a thin, inadequate-looking jacket, a jacket that was clearly not designed for this kind of cold, and he looked so young, so incredibly young. His eyes were wide and filled with a kind of exhausted desperation, a plea that went beyond words, and she opened the door a crack, the blast of cold air hitting her like a physical blow, and he stammered out his request. His voice was shaky and low, a whisper that was almost lost in the wind, a question about a place to rest, a place to get warm, and she looked past him to see a line of his comrades, a long, silent line that stretched down the street and around the corner, a line of men and women hunched against the wind. Their faces were all the same, a universal mask of bone-deep fatigue and cold, and her heart ached for them, a deep, visceral pain that made her want to pull them all inside at once, and she opened the door wide, a gesture of invitation, a silent promise of warmth, a promise that she was about to make good on, and she ushered him inside and told him to tell the others to follow, to bring all of them in from the cold. They came in a slow, steady stream, their boots were thudding on the polished floor, their faces were raw and chapped from the relentless wind, their hands were shaking with an uncontrollable tremor, and they were not boisterous or loud, they were simply grateful, and they took up every single seat, every single inch of available space. A sea of olive green and exhausted faces, and Clara went to work, a whirlwind of quiet, efficient action. She did not ask them what they wanted, she simply began to make it a bottomless pot of her famous chicken noodle soup, a giant carafe of her piping hot coffee, an endless supply of her fresh-baked sourdough bread, and she served it all in a quiet, unwavering silence, a silent offering of comfort, a wordless show of her deep, abiding compassion for their plight. And they ate with a desperate hunger, a hunger that was not just for food, but for warmth, for a moment of peace, for a brief, blessed respite from the brutal elements. And they did not speak, they simply ate. Their eyes were closed in a kind of silent prayer of thanks, a prayer that Clara felt in her very soul, and she knew that this was what she was meant to do, that this was her purpose, to feed the hungry and warm the cold, a purpose that was now so clear, so immediate, so very real, and she would not charge them, not a single one of them, not a single penny would she take for her services. And when a young private hesitantly pulled out a handful of crumpled bills, a small, pitiful offering for his meal, she simply shook her head, a gentle, kind refusal, and she said in a low, firm voice, a voice that carried a quiet, unyielding authority, "This one is on me, son, you just get warm." And he looked at her with a look of such profound gratitude that it made her throat ache, and he did not argue, he simply nodded his understanding, and he put the money back in his pocket, a single tear tracing a path down his cold, raw cheek, a tear of relief, a tear of thanks, a tear that was a testament to her beautiful, unwavering act of kindness. Word spread through the ranks of the soldiers like wildfire, a quiet, whispered rumor of the old woman in the diner who would not take their money, a rumor of the hot soup and the fresh bread and the warm coffee, and a new wave of soldiers began to trickle in, a fresh stream of cold, hungry faces, and Clara fed them all, a tireless, unrelenting force of nature, a woman on a mission, a woman with a purpose that was now so very clear to her. And she worked for hours, for what felt like days, and the sun was setting when a new group of men came in, and they were different from the others. They were not exhausted and grateful, they were tense and on edge, and at their head was a young, sharp-faced captain. His eyes were as cold and as hard as the winter outside. His posture was ramrod straight, a walking, talking embodiment of military discipline, and he looked around at the scene with an expression of open suspicion, his gaze sweeping over the crowded tables and the steaming bowls of soup and the faces of his men, a silent, meticulous survey of the situation. And he approached Clara, who was now standing with her hands on her hips, a look of tired but firm resolve on her face, a look that said she would not be intimidated, and he said in a clipped, professional tone, "Madam, my men tell me that you are refusing payment for your services. This is a direct violation of our regulations, and I must insist that you begin to charge them immediately." And Clara looked at him with a quiet, steady gaze, a gaze that held a lifetime of experience and wisdom, a gaze that held no fear whatsoever. She did not raise her voice. She did not get angry. She simply spoke with a calm, unwavering authority that was her own, a powerful force that was a match for his military bearing. And she said, "Captain, I am not violating your regulations. I am following my own, and my regulation is that no one who is freezing and hungry will ever be charged a single penny in this establishment, and your men were freezing and hungry, and they still are." And she gestured with her hand to the tables, where her hot food was being consumed with such grateful abandon, and the captain's face hardened with a kind of furious disbelief, a look of pure, unadulterated shock, a shock that was mixed with a seething, barely contained anger. And he said in a low, dangerous tone, "Do you know who I am? I am in charge here, and you will do as I say. You will charge them, you will take their money, and you will follow our regulations." And Clara simply shook her head, a slow, deliberate movement that was a final, absolute refusal, and she said, "I know who you are, and I am not impressed, and I do not care what your regulations say. I am doing what is right, and what is human, and what is compassionate, and I will not be bullied by you or anyone else, and I will not take their money, and I will not let them leave this place cold or hungry. And you can tell your superior officer that I said so if you want to." The captain's face went from angry to a shade of purple, a deep, livid color that was a testament to his utter, complete rage, and he opened his mouth to say something else, something that would surely be filled with threats and intimidation. But at that moment another figure came into the diner, a man of a much older age and a much higher rank, and he was a colonel. His uniform was impeccable, his ribbons and medals were a dazzling display of his long and distinguished service, and he was a man of quiet, powerful authority, a man who had an aura of quiet, unyielding strength. And the captain snapped to attention. His hand was at a perfect salute, his body was as rigid as a statue that was now filled with a profound sense of dread, a dread that was palpable in the air. And the colonel simply looked around the room. His eyes were a piercing blue that seemed to take in every single detail in a single, sweeping glance, and he saw his men. Their faces were weary but filled with a quiet contentment. Their bodies were steaming with the heat from the food, their hands were wrapped around the warm mugs of coffee, and he saw the woman behind the counter. Her face was tired but filled with a kind of fierce pride, a pride that was a testament to her simple, beautiful act of defiance. The colonel approached Clara, a slow, deliberate walk that felt like a judgment, and he stopped in front of her, and he looked at her with a look of such profound concentration, a look that was 1,000 times more intimidating than the captain's anger, and he said in a low, grave voice, "I understand you have been refusing to charge my men for their food, and I understand that you have been refusing to take their money, and I understand that you have been defying my captain's direct orders, and I want to know why." And Clara stood her ground. She did not flinch, she did not back down, she simply looked at him with the same quiet, steady gaze that she had given his subordinate, and she said, "Colonel, I am not a charity, and I am not a hero, and I am not a rebel, but I am a human being, and I have a heart, and I have a conscience, and my heart tells me that when a man or a woman is cold and hungry and has no place to go, that you do not charge them for a little warmth and a little food, and my conscience tells me that it would be a sin, a deep, unpardonable sin to take their money, and my reason tells me that a cup of coffee and a bowl of soup is a small price to pay for a life that is so full of sacrifice and so full of hardship and so full of such profound loneliness, and I will not apologize for what I have done, I will not regret it, and I will not change my mind, and you can do whatever you want to me and to my business, but I will not take their money, and I will not let them freeze, and I will not let them starve." The silence that followed was thick and heavy, a silence that was filled with an unspoken tension, a tension that was a mix of admiration and a profound sense of foreboding. And the colonel stood there, his hands were clasped behind his back, his face was a perfect emotionless mask, and he did not say a word. He simply looked at her. He looked at her with a look that was 1,000 different emotions all at once, and she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a flicker that was a mix of respect and understanding, a flicker that was a quiet, wordless acknowledgement of the truth of her words, and he finally spoke. His voice was low, but it was filled with a quiet, undeniable authority. "I see," he said, a simple phrase that was filled with a profound meaning, and he turned and he looked at the captain, a long, silent look that was filled with a quiet, powerful reprimand, a look that said, "You have handled this all wrong." And he then turned to his men and he said in a voice that was now filled with a quiet, powerful command, "Get your rest, men, and get ready to move out. We are heading back to the base now." And the soldiers looked at each other with a sense of quiet, unadulterated confusion, and they began to file out of the diner, a slow, steady stream of silent, grateful men and women. Their faces were still weary, but they were now filled with a quiet, determined hope, and they left 100 silent salutes, and 100 whispered thanks, and Clara stood at her door and she watched them go, a small, proud smile on her face, and she knew that she had done the right thing. The next morning she woke up to a new kind of silence. A silence that was not filled with the gentle hum of her refrigerators and the quiet murmur of the early birds in her diner, and she looked out her window and her heart dropped a heavy stone to the bottom of her stomach, a knot of fear and dread that was so tight it was almost a physical pain for her. Street was gone. It was completely and utterly gone, a solid, unyielding wall of military vehicles and personnel that stretched from one end of her street to the other, and there were armed guards at either end. Their faces were impassive, their bodies were rigid, their presence was a silent, terrifying testament to the power of the army, and her little diner was completely and utterly shut down, a small, insignificant building that was now at the center of a profound and terrible act of military force, and she felt the tears prick at the back of her eyes, a sudden, powerful wave of emotion, a mix of fear and betrayal, a wave that she could not possibly have held back anymore. And she thought of the colonel, she thought of his cold, unyielding gaze, she thought of his silent, terrifying promise of retribution, a promise that he had now made good on, and she knew that she was defeated, that she was done, that her little business, her little world, her little life was over. She dressed in a daze, her hands were shaking, her body was trembling, and she walked out her front door to a new kind of chaos. A chaos that was not filled with the familiar sounds of her town, but a chaos that was filled with the low, menacing rumble of military vehicles and the high-pitched, insistent shouts of a news reporter. Her camera crew were standing in the middle of the street. Their cameras were trained on her door. Their faces were filled with a kind of morbid curiosity, and the townspeople were there to a large, angry crowd that was standing on the sidewalks. Their faces were filled with a mix of confusion and anger, and they were shouting questions. "What is happening? And why are you here? And what did she do?" And Clara stood there, a small, insignificant figure in the middle of a swirling storm of 1,000 different emotions, a storm that was all about her, a storm that had been caused by her simple, defiant act of kindness, a kindness that was now about to be her undoing, and she did not know what to do, she did not know what to say, she did not know how to react, and she was simply standing there completely and utterly defeated. And she saw a news reporter approach her, microphone in hand, a woman with a kind but insistent look on her face, and she said in a low, gentle voice, "Ma'am, can you tell us what happened here?" And Clara opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her throat was choked with a sudden, overwhelming sob, a sob that was a testament to her absolute, utter defeat. And then she saw him. He was there, the colonel was there, standing in the middle of the street, a large, imposing figure in his dress uniform. His face was a perfect, emotionless mask, but his eyes were filled with a kind of quiet, powerful resolve, and he was flanked by a dozen of his men, a dozen of the soldiers she had fed the night before. Their faces were still weary, but their eyes were now filled with a kind of fierce pride, a pride that was a mirror image of her own. And the colonel raised his hand, and a sudden, complete silence fell over the crowd, a silence that was a testament to his quiet, powerful authority, and he said in a low, clear voice, a voice that carried to the very back of the crowd, a voice that was filled with a powerful, unyielding emotion, "Citizens of this great town and members of the press, I have something to say, and I am here today to make a public statement." And the crowd waited with a bated breath, a collective intake of air that was filled with a profound sense of anticipation. And the colonel turned to Clara. His gaze was now filled with a quiet, powerful admiration and a profound sense of gratitude, and he said in a voice that was now filled with a gentle, loving warmth, a warmth that was a stark contrast to his earlier demeanor, "This woman, this beautiful, defiant, compassionate woman, this woman who stood up for what she believed in, this woman who fed my men when they were freezing and hungry, this woman who would not take their money, this woman who is a hero to us all, she did not violate our regulations, she upheld them, and The crowd gasped a collective sound of disbelief, a sound that was a mix of shock and a sudden, dawning understanding. He continued, his voice was now filled with a quiet, powerful emotion. This woman, this hero of our nation, she did not just feed my men. She gave them hope. She gave them a reason to believe in the kindness of strangers. She gave them a reason to believe in the goodness of humanity, and she showed them that the world is not just a cold, heartless place, and she reminded them of the very reason that they serve to protect and to defend the very people who they so often take for granted. And I am here today to honor her, to give her a public commendation, to show her that her kindness has not gone unnoticed, and to show her that she has our deep, abiding gratitude. And the colonel stepped back and he gestured with his hand. And the soldiers who had been standing guard at the end of the street began to move a slow, deliberate movement that was a testament to their perfect discipline, and as they moved, they revealed a large, beautiful banner, a banner that was stretched across the street, a banner that was a tribute to her and her diner, and it read in a large, bold font, in honor of Clara, the angel of compassion, and the crowd cheered a great joyous sound that was a mix of 1,000 different emotions, a sound that was a mix of joy and relief and a profound sense of pride. And Clara stood there, a small, tearful figure in the middle of a swirling storm of emotion, a storm that was now a storm of love and gratitude, a storm that was a celebration of her life and her work and her heart. And she felt a wave of such profound relief, such profound happiness, such profound love that she thought it would just kill her on the spot. And she knew that she was not defeated, that she was not a failure, that she was a hero in her own small way, and that her little act of kindness had changed the world a little bit, a very little bit, and that was all that mattered in the end.